Kansas City police officer Jeff Colvin finally decided to enter her house, but things were not what he expected. He was appalled by what he saw and felt that he needed to act. Well, that's what his version of the story says. The girl whose house he entered went missing a few days later. After more than 10 years, she finally returned with a story about what Officer Colvin did. When this story took place, Jeff Colvin was 25 years old. He had recently graduated from the police academy, and he was filled with a burning passion for helping others and serving the community. But one day he crossed paths with a young girl named Clan Scales. Neither of them could imagine that the encounter would change both of their lives forever. It all began casually. Every now and then, Jeff would patrol the streets of Washington Wheatley, one of the most depressed urban areas in Kansas. On his days there, he often had to face the ugliest side of the city he loved so much. The neighborhood was filled with crime, poverty, and desperation. But every day, he would also see something that would strike him as a glimpse of hope and candidness in the middle of all that misery. Every time he rolled down Indiana Ave, the neighborhood's main street, he would see something through one of the house's windows. And it was something that always reminded him why he was there in the first place. It was like a memento of why his presence there was necessary and what was his role in the world. He would see this young girl named Clan Scales, who at the time was no more than 7 years old, peeping through one of the house's windows and waving at him with a big smile every time she saw him. Every time, Jeff would smile and wave back at her. And this sight would always serve as a reminder of his role. He was there just to make sure that innocent people and children like Clint would stay safe from all the rough stuff that was going on in the neighborhood. But one day, something happened. Word got to Jeff that the little girl had been caught taking things unlawfully from a corner store near the house. When he heard about this, he couldn't help but worry. Was the girl going through a hard situation? Was she being properly taken care of by her parents? He realized he'd never seen any adults with her. And some days later, something else happened that convinced him to dig deeper into the issue. He was driving down Indiana Ave just like every other day. And as he approached the house where Clint lived, he noticed that something was off. Clint wasn't there. This was an unusual occurrence. Every time he would go through that street, the girl was waiting by the window. She probably could recognize the sound of his car. But why didn't she come to the window this time? Could something have happened to her? That's when Jeff decided to enter the girl's house, remembering that she had been caught committing an offense just last week, and that this was the first time she didn't come to the window to wave at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He knocked on the door. Nobody responded. The door was open, so he decided to come in. And what he found inside the house was an absolutely heartbreaking sight. The house was an absolute mess. It almost looked like no one was there to take care of it. Jeff found Clint in the kitchen, serving some food to her younger siblings, but she looked really ill. Jeff said hello to her. Clint greeted him back, but she seemed scared. Jeff asked her how she was doing and questioned her about her parents. And when Clint responded, Jeff finally saw what was going on. Clint's parents were gone. One day, they just went missing without a trace. And ever since, Clint had to take care of her siblings in the house all by herself. Sometimes she could count on her neighbors' generosity and help. But sometimes she had to do things like taking food from one of the local stores, just like she did last week. That's when Jeff knew he had to do something for those children. Quickly, he took Clint to the nearest hospital and her siblings to a care center. Shortly after, the police department arranged for the kids to be adopted by a family in Kansas. Fortunately, the family was able to take care of all the siblings, so they wouldn't need to live in separate houses. After this, Jeff lost contact with Clint until many years later. 12 years later, Jeff Colvin was no longer a junior officer. He was now a sergeant. He still covered the same areas of Kansas City, but he had a lot more responsibility now. It had been years since he had last heard about Clint. That episode was still a burning memory in his mind, and he sometimes wondered where the girl would be now. And one day, their paths crossed again. One day, Jeff received an email from Clint. She was now 19 and was about to graduate from the police academy. The foster parents had given Clint and her siblings a happy childhood, but she had been unable to forget their troubled past and the moment Jeff stepped into their lives. And ever since she was adopted, she knew that her calling was becoming a police officer and helping others in the same way Jeff had helped her and her siblings. Jeff was moved by the girl's story, but she also had a request for the sergeant. She was emphatic that when she graduated, not if, but when she graduated, that I would be the one to pin her badge on her, Colvin told the press when asked about the story. And months later, that's exactly what happened. Clyn graduated, became a full-fledged officer, and Jeff was there to pin the badge on her uniform. I was very proud of her. She really beat all statistical odds to get where she was, Colvin said. Most people would look at her 7-year-old self and basically write her off and say this girl doesn't have a chance in the world. She's not going to amount to anything. She obviously proved everybody wrong there. And that's a lesson we all can learn from. Jeff couldn't believe how many years had passed since the two had last spoken. He couldn't believe that she had grown up into a young woman. He wanted to catch up with her and make up for the lost time. He wanted to know what had happened. Where had she disappeared to all these years? Jeff asked Clyn if she'd be willing to catch up. She was ecstatic at the opportunity to continue her friendship with him. He told her that she could come to his station and they could talk further. She was excited to get there and make up for all of the lost time. But Jeff was about to get a peculiar request. Clyn put on her officer's uniform and made her way over to the station. Her mind wandered about all of the things they could take about. She needed someone to look up to and give her advice about being a cop. But there was more to it than just that. She had something to ask him. She had no idea how he would react. She arrived at the station and met with Jeff. They sat in his office and started chatting about the old days. Jeff had a lot of questions for Clyn. He wanted to find out what had happened to her. She looked down at her feet when he asked, what could she be hiding? She was reluctant to tell him and even had a monumental favor to ask. Clyn explained that she fell on hard times while she had to look after her family. Being pushed into the role of a caretaker without warning has long-term effects on a minor. She had to grow up fast. Over the next few years, Clyn worked to support her siblings. She had to give up her chances of ever graduating from school and focus on her family. Clyn was only just making it in the world. Her job didn't pay well, and supporting everyone in her family meant she was always tired and burnt out. But she confessed that one thing kept her going. She decided to tell Jeff in confidence, but he couldn't believe the words that would come out of the young cop's mouth. She told Jeff that the one thing that kept her going all that time was actually Jeff. She hadn't forgotten what he had done for her and wanted to do that for others. She saved up all the money she could and dreamt of becoming a police officer. And after a lot of dedication and hard work, she was sitting in front of him now as a full-fledged officer of the law. Jeff felt touched that she had kept him in her thoughts all these years. Being a police officer meant helping those that needed it and inspiring the community to do greater things. He was proud of what she had become. But there was more to it than that. Clyn hadn't just come there to tell him how much he inspired her. She was there for much more selfish reasons. Clyn further explained her situation to Jeff. After completing her training and becoming an officer, she was stationed at a precinct in the county over from Jeff's. But he noticed her frown when she started talking about it. She told him what it was like being at that station. It was an unpleasant situation for her to be in, and Jeff sympathized. Clyn told Jeff how most of the other officers at that precinct treated her unfairly. Since she was a rookie and a woman, this meant they were especially biased. They called her names that bordered on harassment. Jeff's blood boiled. He hated discrimination, especially from police officers. But Clyn blindsided him with a selfish question he wasn't ready for. Clyn confessed that she wasn't just there to catch up with him. She couldn't handle that precinct anymore, and a change had to be made. She had learned that Jeff was now a sergeant and had a certain authority. Jeff had no idea what she was about to say, but he couldn't have been prepared. She wanted him to do something drastic. She told Jeff that she would always be considered the rookie girl cop at her precinct, and she wanted things to change. She finally mustered up the courage to ask him a favor. She asked Jeff to transfer her from the precinct she was currently in so that she could get away from the harassment. But the favor didn't end there. Her favor was even more specific than that. She wanted the precinct that she was unbearable, and she had a new one in mind. She wanted to be transferred to the precinct that Jeff was at. He was caught off guard but was more than happy to help. He told her he'd put in a call and see what he could do. A few days later, she had an answer. After waiting for what felt forever, Jeff called Clyn back and gave her the good news. The transfer he had put in for her was accepted, and she would come and work for him by the end of the week. Clyn couldn't believe that he had actually done right by her once again. She now had even more to be thankful for. Over the next few months, Clyn proved herself to be a competent officer who took all of her training to heart. She built a good relationship with all of her colleagues and with Jeff. Jeff made sure that everyone at his precinct felt like family, and that was closure that Clyn sorely needed. She will never forget what he did for her and always try to be an officer like him. In order to protect the privacy of those depicted, some names, locations, and identifying characteristics have been changed and are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblances to actual events or places or persons, living or dead, are entirely coincidental.